A couple of things about the other stuff we've done in the course besides the lectures. That we've had a bunch of discussions on all sorts of different topics, but the main thing to point out is that we've used those authors along the way. So if anybody's looking at these things and wants to know what to read, Hubert Dreyfus, Randall Collins on Interaction Ritual, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, we've read a bunch of different sections out of the Phenomenology of Perception. Irving Goffman, we read Deference and Demeanor, On the Face Work, a couple of things like that. Oliver Sacks, read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, a lot of chapters out of that. Jean-Paul Sartre's work on existentialism is a humanism, is what it's called when it's bound separately, and Anti-Semite and Jew, we read Berger and Luckman, Social Construction of Reality, and then somebody named Chambliss, we read 2 chapters of a book called Beyond Caring, and it's the chapters on routinization, something or other, I don't know what it's called. It's the first 2 chapters of the book. But it's about how people get used to doing stuff. Okay, so I just wanted to say that. Now, you've got 3 handouts today. One is the lecture outline. One is just a paragraph from a book by Walter Kaufmann. A book called Critique of Religion and Philosophy, and it's about the word love. And it's just kind of cool. I just thought you'd like it, that's all. I mentioned it, I think, last week in the discussion. Kaufmann was a really, really good philosopher. Wrote a lot of interesting stuff in the 40s, 50s, 60s, some in the 1970s. He died quite young, actually. But he's probably best known as the major translator of Nietzsche, actually. And he also wrote a really good Nietzsche biography. At any rate, it's just kind of neat for its own sake. You can see what it said. And then finally, there's the last handout was, and by the way, again for the video cast, I plan to post all the handouts and outline of the course and everything like that on our blog. What's the blog? Hamilton College Blogs, Self and Society, I think is what it's called. So my aim is to eventually have all of the material for this course right there in one place, and it'll probably take another year to get it done. Anyway, so yes, this last handout is just more of what I call random notes, which are things I sit in the car and drive back and forth to work and I'm talking to the tape recorder. And these were on things that we discussed in class or some question somebody brought up or just some idea I had. So I'm just giving it to you for whatever. You can line your trash basket as you like. Okay. Today, there are 2 things we're doing. One is I'm going to talk a little bit, as the lecture outline suggests. And the other is I'll hand out, at the end of class, I'll hand out the final take-home exam, which has 6 questions. I think it's 6. Oh, it has 6 possibilities, and you pick 3 and write essays on them, just like you did for the midterm. Okay? Now, anybody have any questions so far? Please. That's due a week from today, yeah, next Wednesday.
Any particular time?
I'm sorry?
Like particular time?
Yeah. Let's call it what business people call COB, close of business, on Wednesday, which is 4 o'clock. That's the time when I get in the car and drive home. Question? Other? Yes, Tom.
Is there a word maximum for the essays?
500 words per. 3 essays, 500 words per essay.
To bring to your office.
Yes, that'd be perfect. Then I'll get a chance to bid you all a fond farewell as I fly off to New York City. I will fly. I'm going to New York City for the spring semester with a number of folks in the room, and I will miss you all. I'll miss most of you. Well, I'm just saying.
What's the theme for the New York City semester?
That's a good thing. That's good.
What's the theme for the New York City program? that you're running?
Health and healthcare is what it's about, really, but it's quite loose. So we do 2 courses on that, and then people do internships in all sorts of things, and then study in all sorts of things. So I'm doing it for my wife, who's a biochemist. So she's doing infectious disease, and I do sociology of healthcare. You have a question? No. Question? Anything? Yeah. So yeah, I was serious. Actually, I will. I'll miss all of you. This course, you probably know, has sort of a special place in my heart. Partly because it's the first course I ever taught, way back when I began, and it's been modified a lot over the years and so on. But even like when I said on Facebook, I posted this thing saying that I was, they would be on YouTube, the lectures. I got this huge, biggest response I've ever gotten from anything on Facebook. From all kind of people going way back. I mean, back to 1977, former students. Then they wanted to look at it, funny or interesting or whatever they thought. But part of the reason it's an enjoyable course for me is it is so fluid. So the lecture today, I was looking over these notes, and this is not brand new today. This was a version I did out maybe 5 years ago. And if I did it today, it would be changed. So I'm doing it today, so I'm changing it as we go. So don't be surprised if we deviate from the outline at various places. And don't be surprised, too, if I get confused sometimes, because, I'm always thinking about these things. And some of these points I look at now, I go, I think that's totally wrong. But that's okay, because the nature of this piece is that it's not so much about telling you some information that you need to learn. It's more about just getting you to think about these topics. And so if I say something that's provocative and strikes you as weird, it may or may not be the case that I actually believe it's the case, but it's true. I think we believe it when I say it. But I'm more asking you to consider it, I guess. Makes sense? And we all kind of know how this works. But this is sort of a final wrap-up version. Not a wrap-up, that's the wrong way to put it. We'll do a wrap-up on Friday where we talk about the issues at the end, in a lot of ways, the issues of the course. This is more a concluding thought of that. Okay? And I'm sitting down because I've got to kind of rework this as I go. All right, so in a way, the point of the course used to be called Sociology of Everyday Life. And that was my preferred title, but I got to Hamilton and they told me you can't use that title. I'm like, the committee on, this seems right? The Committee on Academic Policy actually called me up first and said, you can't use that title. I said, why? They said, it sounds frivolous. Sociology of Everyday Life. Okay. Okay, we'll come up with a serious title. How about Self in Society? Think of the most generic title I could for sociology course. They're like, fine, that's great. And then they complained that I didn't have, that I had sentences in the course description. They said, we don't allow sentences. Where have I come to? It turns out there are reasons for that. It's kind of a telegraphic style and they're saving space. Fine. Okay. At any rate, but the point of the course as Sociology of Everyday Life, or now Self in Society, is to try to, we would say, thematize everyday life. That is, to actually think seriously about stuff that goes on all the time in ordinary people's ordinary world. The most mundane stuff imaginable, which is to say, it's nothing like astrophysics, where people are constantly talking about things that have no connection whatsoever to your daily life. Like, is the universe actually expanding or contracting? Which is an important issue, I guess, at some level, but we don't know. I mean, there are 3 people sitting in the physics department who debate it, but we don't know. But what we're talking about is stuff that everybody's familiar with all the time. Now, one of the problems of that, is that the very nature of everyday life is such that most, the slogan I would use is most of our living consists of not looking. That is, one fundamental characteristic of mundane life is that we don't pay attention to it. And that's okay, because if you pay too much attention to it, you start falling over your own feet. Right? Being self-conscious is not necessarily a pleasant sort of thing. It can be quite awkward. Try to tie your shoes while really paying attention to it. Turns out to be sort of a tricky business. Or typing would be a better example. That if you actually start thinking or playing the piano, you can't do it. The point is you've got to lose yourself before you can actually go through the motions of everyday life. And one way to lose yourself, in fact, as we've seen, is by looking to the future. In other words, not doing what you're doing right now, but aiming towards something. And then your action becomes part of a project in which there are these kind of packages of behaviors that fit together that lead somewhere. What Merleau-Ponty calls habits. Right? Little set packages of things like, I'm going to be in a class. Okay, so then I do this, this, this. And you know what to do, but you know it not just in the sense of explicitly, but you just start doing it and it happens kind of naturally until the end of that particular time period. So what we're doing in the course is trying to stop for a minute and analyze what's going on in those moments of everyday life we usually don't pay attention to. Now, in a way, that sort of focusing of attention is what we mean by thinking. That is, a lot of what we could just call thinking is just, there's more to it, but basically, a matter of paying close attention to things that most people don't pay close attention to. That's almost what thinking is. Which means that, for instance, you can talk about people thinking about all sorts of things. We don't normally think that way. Okay, I'll give you a couple of examples. So I was going to graduate school in 1971. I mean, physically traveling to Connecticut with my cousin who offered to give me a ride up from Tennessee, where he was going to be auditioning for a place at the Yale Drama School. And we were in the car, and my cousin was a very fine pianist. And we're listening to some classical music radio station, and I didn't know squat about classical music. I mean, I'd heard like Handel's Messiah once, that was about it. And we're driving along, and Peter was sitting there, and he's talking about all these pieces of music. And he seems to know all of them. And I'm like, do you know all of them? How do you do that? Oh, yeah. I said, can you like just name a piece of music if you hear it? He says, probably. I think it's incredible. So he turns off the radio. But the next time they announce a piece, he turns down the volume. And then he turns it up and he listens to the music. And he says something like, oh, that's the fifth of the Goldberg variations, and it's Glenn Gould playing. I picked that example because if you know these things, it's not that hard in a sense, but that particular example. But I'm like, oh my God, not only does he know exactly what piece of music this is, out of, some unbelievably huge repertoire, he can name the person who's playing the piano just by the sound of it. I was just flabbergasted. But it turns out, of course, again, if you're a serious musician, that's oftentimes not that tricky a thing to do. And so I thought, well, something's going on here that I just don't understand. And so I went out. The point of this is appreciation of detail and how much you can get from something. So I got to grad school, and I said, well, I'm in graduate school. I'm going to get a PhD. I've got to be a serious person. So part of being a serious person is, you got to know classical music. Does that make sense? You get the idea, right? Like people sort of expect it. Okay, so I went to the Yale bookstore, and I went to the music section, and we had records at the end of the day. And I'm flipping through records, and I'm looking at different names of people. And there's like Bach, and there's Beethoven. I don't know if they're serious. And I see Stravinsky. I'm like, oh, cool. He's like really sophisticated. That's all I knew. I never heard anything about street music. And so I go, and there's the Rite of Spring, which I heard of. Oh, this is supposed to be like cool people. How many of you know this piece of music? Okay, fair enough. So I get this record, and I get back to my roommate's stereo system, and she had headphones. So I got headphones on, and I put this thing on, and I turn this on, and I start listening. I'd never before in my life been scared of a piece of music. Okay, I mean, I start listening I'm like, what the hell's going on here? This is creepy stuff. I mean, this is really creepy. But that's kind of interesting, right? I just realized that music could have this sort of effect. And so then I got another one, which is the Firebird Suite and Petrushka on the flip side. And these are beautiful. I mean, Firebird is beautiful. They're just, oh my God, I'm not here. So I just got mesmerized, and I spent the whole summer, my first summer in grad school, listening to this one record over and over. And one of the results is now, if I go and I hear different orchestras play the Firebird Suite, I can tell the difference. You know, like different orchestras can have a very different view of what it is. Anyway, so the point is just something about interpretation and how people can get into things and so on. Maurice Natanson, not Merle Thompson, Natanson, who was my teacher in grad school, my philosophy professor, used to get fishing catalogs, like fly fishing supplies, rods and reels and lures, and, you know, flies and this sort of stuff. It was just mesmerizing. Had stacks of these things in town. He did not fish. Did not fish. He just found it fascinating to look at all this stuff. And there's this whole immense world, which my son now is in, professional. He's a professional fly fisherman. And is into all this stuff. Just unbelievable esoteric going on in this little world. A different example, when I was studying Olympic swimmers, there was a diving coach in the next school. His name is Ron O'Brien. He's probably the best diving coach in the United States. And has had a lot of people, you know, Olympic divers and stuff like that. And he was training a fellow named Greg Louganis at that point, who was the dominant diver in the world. And I would sit and watch him practice. And on a 10-meter platform, right? So 30-something feet up in the air, Olympic dive. And what struck me was O'Brien, a diving coach, could in effect see the steps that Louganis was taking, even though he was on a concrete platform. He couldn't literally see his feet. But Louganis would come out and do a dive, and then Ron would say something like, "You were a little soft on your second step." I'm like, he can see through concrete. Right? And I was just amazed. But if you've ever worked with high-level coaches, it turns out that's not that amazing. That's sort of where they are, right? He couldn't see through concrete, but he could tell by the way things happen. You know, he just knew where it was, right? What was happening there. Okay? That's a level of kind of appreciation. So somebody like Irving Goffman, to kind of cut back to the chase, had that sort of appreciation of everyday life. He could look at what people were doing and dissect it into 18 different parts right away and see how it kind of all fit together. That's kind of what we were trying to work at in this course. Okay. But, so first is this kind of appreciation thing as a style of being. I actually also thought for a while about writing a book about showers. I like taking showers. I don't know, some of you are into this, right? Now I like baths, but 20 years ago I was in the shower. And I was going to write a book about showers I've known and loved. And there was one, I'm not making this up, there was one on the Upper West Side. Man, it was Riverside and 90th in an apartment. You live up there?
I used to live on 86 or so.
There was this old building, 3-floor building. Anyway, it was my college girlfriend. family's apartment, and there was a shower in there that would knock your socks off. It was, well, anyway, all right, so. But you know, they're different, like volume and placement of the shower head and what kind it is and all these things, and I was into that sort of thing. All right, so, but a lot of everyday life consists of not looking at things, right? We talked about that in routinization, how you can get into a world and just start moving through it without paying much attention and all. And instead, our views, our approach to everyday life, normally speaking, is pragmatic, is practical. Now, this is one of the basic lessons from Heidegger, and he sort of got it from Nietzsche. But that first, this was one of his contributions, his big contribution to philosophy. That is, people start out just being in the world. Okay? The first thing is not some cause that makes something happen, or that there's some set of rules or organization behind us that makes things happen. First, we're just here doing things. That at the outset, we're pragmatically oriented creatures, just going through life, you know, getting our food and meeting people and getting along, right? That's what's fundamental. And so our everyday life is organized in terms not of sort of what we're doing right now in a minute, but of our goals. That is, we have projects. And these can be short-term projects like walking to class, or long-term projects like proving myself to my mother. Right? I mean, that, you understand, we talked about that, right? Existential project, where your life really has some purpose to it, even whether you're aware of that or not. But that everything you do kind of points in a certain direction, and everything's been kind of organized around that. You know, and any one of us could speculate for a few minutes on what that is. What is it for me that really motivates me deep down, that kind of thing. But we all have that kind of orientation. Well, that's important because it means that we're not oriented so much to the present as to the future. That is kind of built into our ordinary ways of doing things is a kind of, what Heidegger called, kind of temporality. Okay, that is an implicit relation to our past and especially to our future. And again, for any one person, you can look and see what that orientation is if you know the person reasonably well. Well, that means also that the objects in our world have meaning. That is, they aren't just things sitting around at random in this, as we said, kind of Cartesian space, right, where they're all, you know, equidistant apart in some sense, or measurably distant apart. Things instead have significance for us. And so, to take, for me, let's say, Tennessee is a moderate distance away from me. Michigan doesn't exist at all. I don't care. But on a map, they're probably, you know, roughly the same distance from here. But for my life, it doesn't matter. Tennessee exists and Michigan doesn't. Okay? And that point is true for every single living person, or a person who's ever existed, right? That everyone's life is that way. Things have meaning with regard to our own projects, and that's what orients the world for us. That's what orients the world for us. And so objects, again, have their own significance. We've talked about that before in a lot of ways, right? That I have the equipment that I use in being a teacher, or being, you know, a husband, or a father, or something like that. Okay. And so then it becomes very hard to simply contemplate objects as objects. That is, it takes an effort to do that, which is what you learn, say, in drawing class. So in a drawing class, you have to stop looking at a flower or a human being or a chair as things you're interacting with, and sort of try to see it as a shape. which again takes a bit of discipline, right? It's hard to do. It's not our normal way of living or of doing things. Okay. So part of the reason it's hard to do that with things we're familiar with, say, is because we're so familiar with them. So somebody you know real well, or a place you know real well. I think I brought it up before. Do you remember the first time you came up the hill? Be at this campus. Hamilton's on top of this hill. You drive up. Can you remember what it looked like? What? I don't know. What did it look like? Any impression?
Figured out that.
What?
It was bigger than I thought it was. I mean, I thought it was bigger than it actually was because I wasn't familiar with everything.
Okay, so it looked big to you when you first saw it?
But now it feels smaller.
But now it feels smaller. Yeah. Yeah. What else? Yeah.
Commons is like on the other side of campus. Like my orientation to it was totally skewed because you were coming from the alumni office.
Ah.
I didn't like anywhere else on campus, so I
Yeah.
thought it was here.
Yeah.
The science center, I remember it was like this like industrial complex, it's terrifying.
Industrial. Yeah.
It seemed there was like a lot of people around, and just like everyone seemed so foreign and far away.
Yeah.
One thing that I found most interesting is that I have an original memory of the place, and that's very separate from how I interact with the place now. Like it almost exists as a separate entity.
Yeah, that is strange, isn't it? And there was some time there in between when you made that shift, but you still preserve them as kind of different places almost, yeah. Wow, that's interesting.
For me, the dark side and the light side honestly felt like two separate worlds.
Yeah.
I remember my first walk across Martinsway Bridge. That bridge could have been a mile long.
You still feel that way?
Not as much. I mean, I recognize that they're two separate
Yeah,
worlds,
right.
but they felt more so separate.
Do you think that's because of the size or because they look so different?
I think for me it was because of the size, not necessarily how different they looked. But all I remember is I'm on one side of campus, then suddenly we're walking across this bridge, and I think, oh wow, there's another whole wing of campuses that feels completely isolated.
Yeah.
I remember everything being really colorful, like especially the barn. And I remember the first time I saw the barn, and it was so colorful.
What kind of day was it?
It was in the spring.
It was in the
like
spring,
nice
and it was
weather.
nice day? Ah, it is nice in the spring, isn't it? Hold that thought.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna comment on that. I have a friend who, in my high school, who visited, and that was the one thing that she picked out, was that the barn was really colorful.
Yeah, that big yellow thing.
Strange, yeah.
Yeah, it is long. Well, so overall, is it fair to say it seemed big, right? It seemed bigger, unfamiliar. Obviously, there's this kind of slightly hostile thing about the science center, or the concrete building in particular kind of looked that way. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is, you said that it's completely different from when you first saw it.
Yeah.
But, that we were expected to make a choice on where we wanted to go to school
Yeah.
based on just that first impression.
Ah. Yes. Go on.
And I guess we can't really know. There's no real way to know if you
That's-
experience it.
That's a
Have your own
very
experience.
important point, right? That you make a decision based on that original view, but then it turns out when you live there, it's not the way it actually feels, right? That's probably worth holding on to, yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, and I know that like I remember I came to an event right here in Red Pit, and like for a year later I couldn't remember where it was because coming back and seeing it again, it looked so different. So I feel like your original memory of places like fades, and when you're actually living here every day, it takes on like a different significance.
Yeah. Well, a good question would be, or it's a great essay topic, right? Would be can you make any generally applicable statements about those differences? Right? Like, what is it that sets the new pattern as opposed to the old? Is it places you're more familiar with? Is that what it is? Places you normally go? Or is it the emotional kind of valence that gets attached to different places or whatnot? That would be an interesting question. I'll throw out one other point that you can see every day, which is, maybe this applies to you. I'll give you an example. When I come to my office, when I go to my office from here, I go up these stairs and then over. But when I go from my office here, I go down those stairs and walk on the lower floor. You follow me? In other words, as somebody once said, the road from Paris to Versailles is not the same as the road from Versailles to Paris. Right? You see it differently depending on which direction you're going. And I'm sure people who design buildings are aware of this kind of thing. I'm not sure who designed this building, but anyway. You know, there's something about taking the easiest path, which is not going to be the same in one direction or the other. I don't know what it is. Anyway, that was kind of a sidetrack. All right, well, let's get back on track. So it's hard to see these things because we're at home. That's the point. And so, being, say, in Hamilton, being on this campus, it might be true that you don't recognize things the way you did, the way an outsider does. You've forgotten what the first impression looks like. It's also true, by the way, just as a side note, that prospective students, let's say, come to Hamilton and they're impressed by, as a perspective, they're impressed by things that will have no relevance to their lives once they do. Right? Like what? What are you thinking?
Well, I have a specific memory of like on my tour. I also had a really weird experience because I came here my junior year in the spring, and I didn't come at all my senior year. I just applied to ED, and I didn't come back until last January. So I had like a really long period of time.
Yeah.
So everything was really different. Yeah, but I remember walking through like the barn area and looking at those Adirondack chairs, and those white chairs, and being like, can't wait to like sit there and study. Like this is so like no one ever sits. I've never sat there before. You just like you form all these expectations and like form a picture of how it's going to be, and it's not even relevant.
Interesting.
The admissions building.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't have a relevance anywhere. I mean, you're not an admissions intern or.
Has no relevance at all. But
Oh, we interviewed there. That was our main friend.
Yeah, I see it. Yeah.
I remember seeing like the 3-story climbing wall. And
Yeah.
it was like really impressive, and I've never set foot on a climbing wall before.
Right. Well, what I used to think of, and maybe this is outdated now, was the swimming pool. Because it's a gorgeous pool. I mean, it is a gorgeous pool. And when they first built it, which was a long time ago, 20 years ago, tour groups would come through and people would say, oh my God, this is great. They're never going to set foot in that pool. It's never, you know, I mean, it's a swimming test or something, that's it. But it works, you know, as a first impression kind of thing. Anyway, okay. So, but what happens then is that you get used to all these things and used to, say, a campus and the setting, like you do, I said, your granny's house, but it'd be your own house, right? The house you grow up in. You get used to the spot on the rug and, you know, the furniture that, you know, you just kind of are oblivious to the flaws in it and so on. You just think that's the way it is, and then somebody new shows up and you realize, like, oh yeah, the sofa has a hole in it, you know, or whatever. Well, that's just the way it is. Yeah.
So one time I went back to visit my old house, and they fixed all of the things that were wrong with my house, and it just looked so weird. Like there wasn't hand marks on the wall where like I used to play, and like all like different stuff. So sad. So sad.
No, it is. It is. Yeah.
But doesn't that happen with people too? Like you see someone's appearance and you judge them on that, but then you get to their personality, and then you can't really see them as just the person you saw first.
Ah. Right.
Well, it's like, I don't know, so we get so attached to our memories too, like living with Adirondack chairs like that just becomes like, yeah, Hamilton will be there. Like I have this like really strong memory from my childhood that I've attached like all the physical meaning to it from like a house I haven't been in. And like then I like saw the house like last break or something like that, and it's just like very foreign, you know, like I could still attach like sort of empirical like, oh, I was there,
Now,
but like
when were you there?
I mean, maybe actually more than 10 years ago, because it was 4 or 5.
Did it look small?
Yeah, a lot smaller.
Right. You ever do that? You go back to your old elementary school and like, oh my God, I remember in sixth grade, or not sixth grade, in first grade, I had to go up to the sixth grade classroom once, which was on the oh my gosh. It's because they had me recite the Gettysburg Address for the sixth graders to inspire them to learn. I was into memorizing stuff, huh?
How did you know when you were in first grade?
My father thought it'd be a cute trick. And it was. He was right. He said, oh, memorize this. Like, okay. You know, and we just got into it. And then, well, then it gets reinforced. You know, like, then they say, we're going to take you up to the sixth grade class. But it was on the third floor. And I'd never been to the third floor. Everybody is standing there, fourth floor 7 years ago. You know, and there are all these monstrous, huge kids sitting there listening. But yeah, there is that thing. And then you go back years later, and I've done it. I've gone back to that building since. I'm like, it's this little building, little chairs. Oh my gosh, it's very strange. It's very strange. Well, and just the house thing, Patrick. So my mom died last year, and she lived the last 30 years of her house, or years in the house. The last 30 years of her life. Excuse me. Get flustered. In a house that she built in 1982, I guess it was. So she's 29 years. And it was her house, and you know I would go there and stay there and stuff. And the house had a lot of significance. Had a lot of significance. It was completely decorated by her and set up exactly the way she wanted. My brother and I helped design and stuff, and my brother especially, not me. And she had these immense flower gardens, like 800 tulips in the garden. Immense, huge, lavish flower gardens. She just basically spent all the time. Anyway, so after she died, we sold the house, and somebody asked me recently if I'd been back to see it. Why would I do that? You know, because I know that whoever bought it did stuff to it. You know, and I kind of, sort of, irrationally believe my mom still is. You know, and maybe someday I'll be able to go and that kind of thing. So, you know, I know what you mean. You go and you look and you're like, oh, gee, like. You know, something's gone that used to be, whatever, not so today. So, anyway. All right, so, point number 4. So, what makes it a world? What makes all these things fit together, you know, in your life? That's a good question. And Merleau-Ponty deals with this one some, is what brings things together for us. Because, you know, Nathanson used to say, that the world, meaning not the physical world, you understand, but the place where we each live, I guess, is accomplished. We used to say the world is not an inheritance, it's an obligation. And what he meant by that was you don't just show up and here it all is. In fact, it's that something we have to choose in some sense. Now, I'm hesitating because this is kind of the crux of the matter, right? And it's a close balance. Are we free to make the world any way we want it, which is the Sartre view, right? Remember that? You're kind of free to see things any way you want to and interpret them in various ways and so on. Or, Sartre's over here, and Merleau-Ponty is probably over here a little bit, like, well, not quite, because we have habits and body constraints and so on. And then there are other people, like serious sociologists, who are maybe way over here, who say, no, you know, the world is what it is, and you're just given it, right? Or even a kind of hard science view said, no, there are physical objects, and that this is all just physics, basically. And we're being moved around by our chemistry. But you see what I'm saying here? So Nathanson said, it's not an inheritance, which is kind of a little bit over here. It's an obligation that we are thrown into the world, and that's the Sartrean view and so on. And we have a responsibility to make it in whatever way we're going to live it. We, in effect, decide what things are going to mean for us, who's going to be important, what's going to be important in our lives, and so on. Okay, so that we leave open as a question of how that works. But it is certainly true at the micro level that we have to, for instance, see a face. Okay, Sartre wrote a great essay on this, if you're interested. That when you look at a human being, normally speaking, what you see is a person. Okay, not a collection of features. That is, we see the person behind the mask, so to speak. And this is true when you meet a stranger. You look at them and you impute a meaningful person to that face, whether it's good or bad. Now, maybe you're wrong about your first impression, but that's a different issue, right? But you do believe there's a human being there. Whereas, you remember in Sachs, some of his patients had the problem where they couldn't see a face. They would see two eyes and a nose and the brown hair, and they go, oh, okay, and he's sitting there. That must be math, because he's sitting here and he has two eyes, and, you know, there's the face, and the brown hair, and I got the, right? But they don't see the person initially, and that's a facial agnosia, I guess is what they call it. And Hubert Dreyfus, whose book we read, actually suffers from this kind of problem himself. He can't remember faces. I mean, apparently he has a mild case, but he has trouble remembering people's faces. So his own students have to introduce themselves to him when they see him. Perfectly nice man, I can tell you that. I've talked to him a few times. He's a really nice guy, but you know, he just has this neural deficit of some sort. I'm sorry, there was a question.
Well,
Susan.
I was just going to say, but even in those cases that he brought up, those people still see the person in a very different way. They will experience the person, but just not through their face.
Yeah. Which would have to have implications for interaction rituals. Right? For Collins, is the feedback that you get normally just looking at a person when you talk to them, to see their responses. They must not be able to do that, to process that the same way. So maybe they depend more on hearing or something. I don't know. I don't know how that would work. Yeah.
And he teaches this kind of stuff too, right? So
yeah,
it's so interesting that to be that person, and especially for other students as well.
It is. It's very interesting. Now he tends to do big lecture courses, but I can tell you he's very good at it because he was here. I think I told you, and he taught this class one day 10 years ago. He came in and did a guest lecture, and he was just phenomenally good.
Well, isn't that the whole point though? Is that like because he can't see it, he has more hyper awareness of how it works?
That may be.
Because like it's not normal for him to see things like that. So the whole idea of studying it is kind of.
But he has to kind of work at it. That may well be. Now, I think I've also told you Oliver Sacks. The people, maybe this is how attention gets drawn to things, right? So Dreyfus has this particular deficit, and he's really interested in phenomenology, right? And Oliver Sacks has had neurological problems of various sorts in his life, and is really interested in those issues, and writes beautifully about them.
Just another example, I think it's either Chuck Close or Andy Warhol who does the like huge paintings of faces.
Oh yeah.
And he has face blindness too, so.
Oh really?
Yeah, he like can't barely recognize it.
Yeah. I guess that's ironic. That there's, that something you're not good at becomes a real focused attention. Maybe that's why sociologists aren't socially. We're always standing off on the side of the school, looking at it. I'm studying.
Meetings with the majors are awkward.
Maybe what?
The meetings with the such majors are awkward.
Is that right?
What is awkward?
That's right. But the chemists are really smooth.
They have beer club.
They what?
The chemists meet every other Friday at the pub to to interact.
Is that right?
Mhm.
Is that legal?
Yes, because they're all over 21 at that point.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, let's skip a couple of things. I'll leave you to think about the implications of prepositions. I was trying to think of ways of capturing the idea of how we relate to different things in the world. And I thought, well, what's the difference between being in the Army or a member of a church or with a company or for being at Cornell, let's say. People use different prepositions to define different relationships to organizations, and I don't know what that means. I just had a list up there. Okay, but anyway, so a major point would be that the world is, let's say for any one person, the world is fitted together according to one's own projects, right? And what's relevant for those projects. But that's a weird way to think about things, and kind of scary, probably. Kind of scary at a certain level. That is, in anxiety attacks, as we've said, or depression, you realize that the world's togetherness is kind of arbitrary. That is, things feel like they don't have any meaning. And you go, what's the point of doing this? Why do that? What is this about? Nothing. That's the way you feel. That's pathology, right? It's not normal. It's not the way we normally are, thank God. But it happens. And so but playing with that idea, or being even aware that that's a possibility, is frightening. So what we try to do, existentialists suggest, is pretend that it's not the case. That is, we try to pretend that things have fixed meanings and that life has a clear purpose. This is what bad faith, for instance, is all about. That is, believing that I have no choice. I am a student, therefore I do my homework and turn in the exam. I'm not going to get up and leave. Right? I'm a professor, it's my job, I gotta stay here, I'm doing this, whatever. Now I can tell you, from experience, that's a comforting thought. It's okay to get up in the morning and say, well, I feel kind of cruddy, but I got to go to work. Because that's what's expected. Okay. And then I do it. And knowing that that track is there is okay. Because there's no telling what would happen if I sort of threw that away. And what if I just bailed out of college and told my parents to go jump? Oh, let's not even consider that one. Right? Because once you go there, there's all sorts of possibilities. And so instead, we tend to get into what one might call second-hand lives. That is, here's the expected path. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow it along. And I'm an old pro at this, by the way. I knew from, literally in third grade, there was a school play called Children of the Sun. Did I mention this to you before? Where we all pretend to be planets. You walk around in big circles, ellipses, I suppose you should have. And I'm Mars. And there was somebody who was a sun. And there was a narrator for this little program, and it was me, and I was the professor. Third grade. And I knew from ninth grade that I was going to be a teacher of some sort for sure. And, here I am. And finished college, went straight to grad school, blah, 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 blah. Totally predictable in a sense, kind of thing. And like I say, that's very comforting. But it's kind of a little dishonest, Like, at certain points, you wind up not doing them because it's not on that track. And then you might think later, gee, I don't know, was that a good idea or what? But it's quite comforting. And you do this with relationships, obviously, all the time. So we say things like, in the examples I've given, of course, I'm in love. Or I'm in a relationship, or, I have a boyfriend or something. Or I'm married. like, once that's there, then it's a thing. And people break up and all, but for today, there's this thing. See? Right? Like I got a ring or whatever. So it must be real. But I was in Boston once, a few years back, and for some reason I was thinking about this stuff. And I'm walking down the street, and I look up, there's the Hancock Building. You know the Hancock Building in Boston? It's beautiful. Big thing. I mean, it's a monolith, right, of glass, beveled edges, weird look from various angles. But it's and I thought, wait, love is not like the Hancock Building. It's not just there. It's gotta be, it's a doer, right? It's something people do on an ongoing basis. And the whole argument, Berger and Luckman's whole book is really about this kind of problem. That we like to think that relationships and societies and stuff are these fixed things that just exist there like the Hancock Building. But it's not true. It's not true. Okay. But we live that way all the time. All right, so next point here, it says, number 7, I'm just skipping number 6 because that's more exciting. It says, well, let me think about how to rephrase this because I'm not sure I agree with this. By the way, this gesture I got from my brother, Tom, who's older than me, who's 6 years old. Doing that, pulling up the glasses, walking for when I first saw it on the video, I'm like, it's Tom. And I look exactly like my older brother. It's kind of eerie. I am my others. And then later, watching the same video, I saw my college advisor. My college advisor. There's some expression, I can't remember it, that I made after saying something in one of these deals or something, that just is a dead ringer for Penny Roselle. Oh my God, I just pick up all these things from other people that we know. Anyway, secondhand lives of some sort. So, what was I going to say? Okay, reality. Okay. So here's the problem. Here's the kind of philosophical problem. Is what is the philosophical / empirical problem? What is most real? Now, Berger and Luckman say the paramount reality is what? Yeah, what do they call paramount reality? Primary reality. Everyday life, right? As opposed to, say, scientific life or athletic life or plays or dreams or drug-induced, states. Everyday life is the paramount reality. And what is the most compelling setting for deciding on reality in everyday life? What do they talk about? What's the most compelling stuff? Where do you feel most real? Pardon?
At home.
At home and doing what?
Interacting?
Am I asking the wrong way?
Interacting with other people?
Right. Face-to-face conversations is what I was kind of getting at. Is that they say the face-to-face encounter is the most real version of meeting other people, at least. Maybe I didn't ask the question. That our dealings with others, face to face, seems to trump everything else. We talked about that, right? Okay. Let me just throw out an idea here and see what you think. Maybe it's not even an idea, maybe it's just a topic. What about this notion that, well, the way I think of it is, the real world is somewhere else? That is, you're in college, for instance, and people talk about in college, they say, well, when I finish college and get out in the real world, blah, 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 blah. What does that mean? Yeah.
college isn't really, you know, this world, the way we live here is not the way we're gonna be living the rest of our lives. We have, we all live together with all our friends, we go to, there's a dining hall where everyone eats, there are many, we go to all classes. This is a certain world that we're gonna be living in for 4 years of our lives.
Yeah.
I think it also goes back to like secondhand life, I mean, if we're expected to come to college and like, before that, we were expected to go to high school, we were
Right.
expected to live at home.
Oh,
Now, like
nice
after
point.
college.
Then it's more like your life.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
Well, it's just the idea that this doesn't count in the long run. You know, so we should just do what we can do to.
I think that's also a big part of it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, basically, we're also like if it's a stop on your way to the more like some realities are basically valued.
Well, this is good. This is good. We're really fleshing this out, okay? So there's the notion that this is not really my life at this point, right? That's the second analytic point. It's not really my life. Maybe therefore it doesn't really count, right? That's good. Maybe, and it's also not as highly valued. That might be part of it.
Sorry. Also that you don't have the same responsibilities that you do in the real world, so
Absolutely.
you're not responsible for family or for a partner.
Yep, you don't have the responsibilities.
I think it's kind of like a pause when you realize, because
Yeah.
say you come across the country to this random place with people you don't know and have no connection to, and then you like go back. So it's kind of like this like own little separate thing that
there's
your
an
family's not
enclave.
really part of.
An enclave, a different world or something, right? And Jason, you were up.
Well, I just want to say that if you can look at your life as a whole,
Yeah.
and you look at, you know, what you've gone through at the beginning of your life, childhood, school is kind of world,
Yeah.
and college is a very short chunk of another kind of world.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot more, hopefully, that
Yeah.
you will have, which is a different kind of world, which is just, I guess, an exploration of your aspirations and your career, like where you want to go.
Yeah, Susan.
But what I think is really interesting about this is that, like, while this may not be our real world or our definition of our real world, we're still interacting with people who, like, aren't in this world with us that treat it like their real world. Because
Like?
This is, like, for example, you as a professor, this is your routine.
This is more real for me than for you.
Right, but
This is interesting. This is
still-
very interesting problem.
But we, like, recognize that, but we don't necessarily, I don't know, if that's right.
No, and that part is fascinating. Well, this is selfish on my part, but it's true in the sense that what happens at graduation is always really weird for me, because I think I'm important to students, you know, in various ways. And then they graduate. On graduation day, I look and they're with their families and everything. I'm like, I realize I'm this like passing figure in the night or something. It's really very strange. It's very strange. But that's the way it works, right? And you go anywhere you go. You know, there are these kind of moments of realizing that your position is shifting with people and stuff. Fascinating stuff, yeah.
I think also because like dependence and independence isn't as clear cut, whereas like when you're younger and you live at home, you're very clearly dependent, and when you get out of college, you're very clearly independent.
Yeah.
Whereas college is kind of a middle ground,
In
and so
between, right.
because it's not one or the other, we don't see those.
Right. So I'll throw out a couple other examples. Yeah, Steve.
I was just say that the different roles that students and professors take is kind of an acknowledgement of the different realities that students and professors occupy. They have, there's different expectations and there's different kind of expectations of behavior, particularly.
Yeah, right.
Certain things are acceptable for students because they're living in a different reality in a lot of ways than the professors are.
Yeah.
On campus.
Yeah. Yeah. There was another. Okay. Let me throw out a couple other cases of this. When I was studying hospitals, this nurse I knew real well, I was talking to her about somehow this subject came up, and I said, grad students always talk about the real world after graduate school. And she said, oh, and I said, like you're in the real world. She said, this is not the real world at all. Meaning working in a hospital doing all that stuff. I'm like, that looks about as real as it gets to me. I don't know. But she thought, oh no, it's this weird, strange enclave where people do these bizarro things. Everybody's sick, and that kind of stuff. and she thought of that as very, very distinct from real life in some way. Yeah.
Then it completely hinges on what you define as real.
Correct.
Because I mean, when personally, when I'm here and
Yeah.
not back home, I don't, it's weird. I consider being home real. Being here.
Is that right?
Yeah. That's just my
See, it's
take on it.
interesting. When I was at college, it was the opposite for me, actually. I thought of college as real, and that was it. And then the other stuff was just kind of not a mistake. That would be.
When I say home, I don't necessarily mean like at home in my house kind of thing. Just more like in where I'm from.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, why?
Personal experience that got me really thinking about what we just said. When I was talking to a friend when we came home, he was talking about how he was just kind of lounging around doing nothing over winter break. And then his mom said to him, "Why don't you help me clean?" He turns to his mom and says, "You realize I'm on vacation, right?"
Oh, that.
And that to me, I thought, holy cow! Holy cow, you're right. We're in the setting of being. And that thought hadn't even occurred to me in the setting. And that just made me realize that this right now is real life for me because I'm here for the majority of the year. So being in the setting where I used to be for the majority of the year that's now the rare treat. And that was compared to what has been and what will become again. This is kind of an odd instance.
Okay. So here's the question. I'm sorry. Here's the question. Can you figure out, this would be a great exam question, actually, is what makes something real? I don't mean something like this, but something like a moment. What makes a moment real? How's that? And trying to figure out the different components to that would be really interesting. Okay, yeah, Mike?
Could that be number 7?
That could be, sure. We got number 6 is make up your own. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that opens all down. Notice who got excited.
I also think it has a bit to do of where you feel comfortable, and it also has to do with the rules of where you are. Because I feel like, there were rules while living under my parents' roof.
Yeah.
Now there are rules being at college, and hopefully there's going to be at some point be my own rules, and that's going to be my reality where I get to establish my own rules. Besides, obviously,
We'll call you up inside here
citizenship,
and
but
see if that feels like real life. Alex, you haven't said it.
I kind of feel like it's just an excuse for people to act like contrary to norms. Like we say college isn't real life. Like
that's the responsibility. It doesn't really count.
exactly. And in terms of the hospital, it's not real life because if it was real life, it would be scary and frightening and all of
Well,
that.
that's a very good point. I think that's what my friend
And a lot of people just kind of try and keep suspending that real life,
Right.
saying that they're not living in real life.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead. I don't know. Yeah, who's not spoken? You haven't spoken right now.
Yeah, I think it relates back to the sort of like not noticing something until it goes wrong sort of theory.
Yeah.
Because you're saying like hospitals as real as it gets, like someone like cracks their head open, like that's gonna really like jolt you into the situation.
Yeah.
Whereas for her, it's every day, right?
Right. Maybe it has something to do with that. All right. I'm going to go on and make a few, because we're running out of time here, but we can continue on this on Friday too, right? Okay, this discussion, because these are good things. Okay, so point number 8 here, it says, each one of us is stuck in the world, can't bow out. You know what this is about. Well, but there are a couple implications to this. This notion of being in the world or being stuck in the world, or you can't escape. Well, one of them, I'll just throw out a couple ideas. Some years back, I got in an argument with a professor here, another professor here, and she said, well, you can never, this is 25 years ago, she said, you can never really understand what I'm talking about because you're a man. And I said, yeah, and you're a woman. she was sort of arguing that I couldn't have a legitimate point of view because I was sort of enmeshed in a self-interested position, right, on the issue. But my point back was that so is she. Right? That is, everybody is somebody, is what I put here. There's no escape from the contingencies of your being. That is, you exist at a certain time and place. You're male or female or tall or short or whatever, right? You know, you're a student or you're not a student. That's all there is. There's no position from which anybody can claim superiority by virtue of not being an interested party. Is another way. That's more the way Sartre would say it, is that everybody's committed already. And there's no position that transcends that. Okay? And another version of this is stuck in the world is that here we are and we're doing stuff, and a lot of times it's silly. You know, so we're taking a college class, and you and I are just drawing about stuff and telling little stories and getting bored and whatever. And a lot of people think it's all bullshit, right? I mean, a lot of people in the world think what we're doing is really a phenomenal waste of time and money. Maybe so, right? Maybe what they're doing is too, I don't know. But I guess what I would just throw out at you is there might be big things to be done out there, although it's not clear what they are. But I suspect that in every realm of activity, a lot of it's just little daily stuff. And I guess when I was about your age, I was thinking about this, and I sort of, the slogan I came up with was that at a certain point you realize that the little things in life are not really little things, they're the only things. So if you, is that
I just thought of it.
Okay, but you know, a simple version of that would be I'm writing a book, and it turns out you don't ever write a book. You know, you write one paragraph, and then you know a couple hours later you write another paragraph, and after you know 6 or 8 years of this, you've written a book. I don't know. There's no opportunity to do the big thing. There are very, very few opportunities. And a lot of people spend their whole lives the way we watch movies, and movies are all, American movies in particular, are all about like a big defining moment where a person finally stands up to the boss and tells them, well, my God, I've been putting up with your bullshit for years now. I'm walking out of here. Right? Or, some triumphant moment, like the little kid on the team, finally gets the ball in the big game and they throw it and it goes through the hoop and everybody goes, hey. Right there, and it's as if we've got this fantasy that there are these moments of heroism that will present themselves at some point when you have the chance to do the really big, cool thing, be a hero. And I guess I think of this as waiting for heroism. Right? We're waiting for this big opportunity. And the problem is, one way of thinking it never comes. But the other is to think it's always here. Right? That is, this is what we got. This is the real world, is another way of thinking of it. So this course being a good example. So here's it's a college class, and so it's kind of easy to isolate that and say, oh, it's a college class, okay. This is one reason I hate grades, because grades remind you that it's a college class, and therefore it's this isolatable chunk of life. You say, oh, no, that's cool. Did that, check that, got credit. And then it doesn't matter as much. Is kind of the implication. So whether it matters to you or not is what I'm saying. See, this is more Sartre. It's totally up to you. Right? You can do with it all sorts of things if you want to. Or you can say, no, that's a course. Okay. Just kind of move it over here. And, you know, and my fallback is I say, well, I'm a professor, I'm just doing my job. All right? And I don't know if that's bad faith or not. It's not really the way I see it. But, that's certainly not.